We're going to kick off the exploration and geology session. Gary, Hazen, and Max Heyer from CDM Smith are going to start us off talking about lead mining and reclamation in Missouri, past, present, and future. Gary Hazen is an associate environmental engineer with CDM Smith and is CDM Smith's Remedial Feasibility Studies Discipline Leader. Mr. Hazen received a Bachelor of Science in Geological Engineering, cum laude, from Missouri University of Science and Technology in 1994. He is a professional engineer as well as a professional registered geologist licensed in multiple states, including South Dakota, Kansas, and his home state of Missouri. Mr. Hazen has over 28 years of professional environmental consulting experience focusing on environmental investigation and remediation of hazardous waste sites and cost estimating supporting remediation. One of Mr. Hazen's focus areas of practice is remediation and reclamation of abandoned mine sites. And he was authored and co-authored multiple papers and presentations and presented at several national conferences on subjects related to that focus. Mr. Hazen has personal ties to lead mining and reclamation and remediation in Missouri, including family members involved in historical lead mining and his personal experience with growing up in lead mining areas and later professionally in remediating and reclaiming lead mining impacts in Missouri. Max Heyer is an environmental geologist with CDM Smith. Mr. Heyer received his Bachelor of Science degree in environmental geology from the University of Kansas in 2010. He is a licensed professional geologist in Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, and Wyoming. Mr. Heyer has over 10 years of experience with geologic, hydrogeologic, and environmental assessment and remediation projects. He's managed many multidisciplinary environmental projects across the United States, and he has extensive experience in the assessment and remediation of lead-impacted sites. Please join me in welcoming Gary and Max.
All right. Yeah, so we are co-presenting. My name is Max Heyer. That's Gary Hazen. I'll start us off here. So yeah, our presentation is lead mining and reclamation in Missouri, past, present, and future. It's a pretty broad topic and a little bit of a different flavor for this conference talking about down in Missouri, but hopefully there's some crossover and people find it interesting here. There's a lot of information to go over. We'll focus more on the past and up to the present, so getting into the history, also the geology, and then leading up to the current status of a lot of the legacy mine sites in the area. And then hopefully, we would come back at some point if people enjoy this and do part 2, where we detail some of the remedial and reclamation actions. Let's see. So I'm sure most of everyone knows here, but there's a very significant importance of lead, and Missouri being one of the largest producers of lead in the world, has a special significance here. In developing those ores and distributing them throughout the United States and throughout the world, actually. So lead's use dates back to the Roman times and even before that, and then its use really has picked up for various uses since the Industrial Revolution. Of course, it's been used in paint and gasoline, and we know the hazards associated with that. But it also has a lot of uses that we need for everyday life, such as lead-acid batteries for vehicles, ammunition for bullets, and plenty of other uses. So I just want to emphasize the importance of Missouri in this. So this is just a slide showing kind of the production of lead in Missouri the last 2 centuries. So its ore were really discovered in any appreciable quantity in the 1700s. You can see, early on, we start to get noticeable or quantifiable amounts of lead, and then really an uptick after the Industrial Revolution. Its use started to become more prominent. You get railroads, technology improves, and so there's an exponential increase in its production and use. It this graph really, if you look at it closely, mimics some of the world's biggest events. We have, a big uptick in production, World War I, a dip during the Great Depression area, and then another uptick, World War II. And then this downturn actually signifies the kind of depletion of the old lead ores that were, identified in the 17 and 1800s, and a large uptick with the discovery of new ore bodies that we'll kind of go over, and also reclaiming and recycling of lead, primarily through lead acid batteries. So 3 major lead mining districts in Missouri: Central Mining District, Southeast Missouri Lead District, which is comprised of the old lead belt and the new lead belt, and then the Tri-State District, which encompasses a large portion of southwest Missouri, but also into southeast Kansas and northeast Oklahoma. We'll focus more on the Missouri side here, but and we're really not going to focus on the Central Mining District. It just really doesn't have the quality or quantity of lead ore that Southeast or Tri-State do. Good comparison, I guess, here from the previous slide. So we have the Southeast Lead District circled here in purple. Of note here, we have a Precambrian basement rock that was uplifted in the Pennsylvanian. It's actually part of the St. Francis Mountains. And the lead ores are found all around this body, deposited in the Cambrian material surrounding it. And then Tri-State District, we find the lead ores in the Mississippian limestones. So I guess I'll get a little bit more into the geology and mineralization. We'll kind of do a compare and contrast between Southeast Missouri and Tri-State. We've kind of set up the presentation that way. So a lot of similarities, a few differences. Here's you can see the Galena body in a Southeast Missouri lead mine. I'm going to step up here so I can see better. So this is just a zoom. Like if you look down here, you can see this is Missouri. Here's again the primary or Southeast District. The purple is indicative of the Precambrian exposures, and then you've got sub-districts of mining to the north and to the east. Those are part of the old lead belt, so those ores have actually been depleted. But as I mentioned before, there's a rich body called the New Lead Belt or Viburnum Trend to the west, which was discovered in the 1950s and continues to be mined in appreciable quantities to this day. Go over the geology, very simplistic, but just to gain kind of an understanding. So, source of the metals are from the basement confining unit and magmatic sources. Those were brought up during uplift events, and essentially the metals were driven in hydrothermal solutions up to the Bonne Terre Formation, which is Cambrian, and cut off or confined by the Davis shales. So yeah, hydrothermally moved upwards and then was able to epigenically be deposited in the Bonne Terre Formation. Where the Bonne Terre Formation pinches out against some of these Precambrian knobs, that's a really good indication of where the rich ore bodies are actually located. I think I went through most of everything on the last slide, or at least talked through it, but a nice mineral specimen of galena. Of course, galena is the state mineral of Missouri based upon the large quantities of galena that we have. Pretty simple there, or pretty quick on the geology. Transitioning into the tri-state, this is taken or a photo of the Joplin Mineral Museum, so some pretty nice specimens there. You can kind of see the quantity and quality of different minerals that we get in the area. So, Tri-State, as its name suggests, spans southwest Missouri into Kansas and then into northeast Oklahoma. And there's, again, different sub-districts and different mineral associations varying depending on where you're at. Similar geology and mineralization of the lead ores, magmatic source, and during the Ozark uplift, a lot of faulting, which created fracture zones where this source material could actually be brought upward in a similar manner as the Southeast Lead District. It was just the only difference really is that it was deposited or mineralized in the Mississippian limestones rather than the Cambrian material associated with the Southeast. Again, you've got these shales that act as a confining zone. And since this happened epigenically, these limestones had been eroded, weathered, and created a lot of void space for the mineralization to occur. Tri-State differs a little bit in its mineralogy. So we get galena, sericite, all the lead minerals, but we also get a lot of zinc as well, so sphalerite and some others. And actually, lead was mined initially, but soon after that, or as the mines were being discovered in Kansas and Oklahoma, more and more zinc production actually occurred, along with the lead production, but a slight difference than the Southeast Missouri district. So that's a bit of a background on the geology. We'll get into the history, and then Gary will take over and kind of talk about the demographics and lead us up to the modern age. So nice slide here going over the timelines. I've kind of talked about this already, but to the top here we have the Southeast Lead District, and so that spans from 1700 up until the present. And then contrasting that with the Tri-State District, which timeline is much more condensed. So the Southeast Missouri Lead District, mining began in the early 1700s, and it's still mined to this day. Various peaks and valleys of production, of course. The Tri-State Lead District, like I said, its time span was shorter, so it was discovered later and depleted in the 1950s to 70s. Yeah, some pretty wordy slides here, and I've touched on some of this, but initially discovered by, or really mined significantly by French settlers, this is the Southeast Lead District, very strong French contingent in the area, and so there was a need for lead over in Europe, and so they would actually do really focus on surface mining. No processing really in the area, no smelting. It was actually all the lead ore that was mined was actually shipped back over to Europe and used over there. But as technology improved and the need for lead increased in the United States and Missouri, start to see new technologies able to get at ores that are deeper and more significant ore deposits. And then because of that, you start actually processing, smelting the ore there. So, it started in the mid-1850s or mid-1800s, but really the St. Joseph's built a large processing smelter in Herculaneum, Missouri. Probably some people are aware of that. That smelter actually operated up until 2013. It was the last primary lead smelter in the United States to operate. So as I mentioned before, Missouri, significant quantities of lead ore. It replaced Idaho as the foremost lead mining state in the early 1900s and has led the United States in production for most of the time since then. It's also, one of the largest deposits in the world as well. So worldwide, same can be held true. And then, as I mentioned a couple of times, I think the old lead belt depleted in the mid-1940s into the 1950s. That coincided with actual discovery of the viburnum trend, which contained richer ores, easier to mine. And so you see a significant uptick in the production actually since that time. Just an aerial view of Herculaneum. So this is the smelter still there. There's the Mississippi River. So hopefully part 2 we would get into a little bit more of the impacts and the remedial status and actions that have occurred because of that. But just wanted to note that real quick. So these are some pretty cool photos. This is a magazine cover published by the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, circa 1950. And you can see the cavernous and openness of the lead mines in the Southeast Lead District. This is especially cool because this is Gary Hazen, my co-presenter and colleague's great-grandfather. So yeah, super cool. Gary's family history is emblematic of Missouri lead mining as a whole. His great-grandfather worked in the mines. He grew up near the giant mountainous chat piles of southeast Missouri, and then he continues that legacy on today, working in cleanup of legacy mining activities. So just Gary could probably speak a little bit more on this, but it's very cool. There's a close-up of his great-grandfather conducting. He was a lead engineer for the mines. Yeah, pretty neat here, him surveying. And then that's another poster of him, which I think Gary has hanging up in his house, that he sent back home to his family with love from Dewey. So yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so now transitioning back to the Tri-State Lead District. Again, later time frame as settlers continued to move west. Oh man, I really need to move through this. The Tri-State District was discovered. Let's see. I guess I'll try and shoot through this pretty quickly, but some kind of interesting things. Lots of mine shafts, lots of settlers trying to discover ore on their properties. So tons of blasting, and which led Joplin to be considered the city of holes. Yeah, pretty good information here, but I think I've covered a lot of this. I want to give Gary some time to go through this. Around the 1870s is when blackjack or jack zinc mining became very common in the tri-state area, and I think it became more profitable than lead mining. So there was an uptick in lead mining again during the World War II time frame, but really after that, that's all kind of the end of mining in the tri-state area. Just some cool old photos of some chat piles in Joplin, Missouri, which is southwest. I won't touch on this too much, but just a slide going through the smelting process in the tri-state district and the evolution of technology. I think a big finding was, or a big improvement was when they were able to recover some of the smelter fallout, and they would turn that the residue into white lead, which was used for pigment for paints. And so here's an old advertisement for Pitcher Lead Company advertising Sublime white lead. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. I think now it's a good transition to Gary. So there you go.
Thank you, Max. So just wanted to talk a little bit about the mining impacts on demographics and economics. I'm going to go back real quick just to that one. Just a little more about my great-grandfather. So Scottish-American mining engineer, graduated from the Missouri School of Mines now, University of Missouri-Raw, now it's Missouri University of Science and Technology, evolution of the name of it, but it still focuses on mining engineering. He was both surveyor and mining engineer, and he was the primary or lead chief mine surveyor for the St. Joe Lead Company in the old lead belt mines, and worked in Mexico before he worked in the old lead belt. So had a lot of international experience in mining. And then, like Max already talked about, sort of the background there. So getting into the impacts and development in the Southeast Mining Lead District, those towns in Southeast Missouri, exist and thrive because of the historical mining in the area. And there's a name of few of the towns there, but there's many others that have, a mining history, again, back to the 1700s with the French, all the way up to the present. Talking a little bit about, to this day, the community's proud of the lead mining background, at least the older generation. It's obviously changing, especially with its proximity to St. Louis in terms of urbanization or suburbanization, but still a very important part of the history there. You can see a few interesting quotes. There's festivals there that, celebrate the mining, such as Old Miner Days in the Viburnum area near the St. Doe Run Lead Mining Company. A little bit of mining humor there, especially on the second slide there with the Bonne Terre mine. So we, try and keep our sense of humor there in Southeast Missouri. Not sure which category my great-grandfather fit into there, but and then colleges and universities grew out of the lead zinc mining. Already talked about Missouri University. I think the point is our logo is Joe Miner, so sort of an interesting little tie. And then Mineral Area College is right there. In the Park Hills area, just where some of the historic mining occurred. To this day, that's employed thousands of miners over time, hundreds of miles of subterranean, tunnels between all these various towns. So some of them extend, 10, 15 miles horizontally from one town to another, and you could go from one mine to another. My great-grandpa talked about that. Still active mine in the Viburnum Trend. Significant impact in Missouri to this day, and you can see a picture of the active the mine at the Buick mine in Buick, Missouri. And then a little interesting factoid, many of you have heard about Lake of the Ozarks through the show Ozark on TV, but it's a major recreational area in Missouri, and it got created in part because of the energy needs of the mining, and so it's reported that there was an agreement to purchase electricity from the dam, and that drove this project, which now is a major driver for Missouri economics. Kansas City and St. Louis residents go every weekend and recreate on the lake, as you can see in the picture. The chat dumps themselves were a source of recreation. These are actually family photos of my cousins and brothers. And you can see the four-wheel off-road vehicle use on the chat dump, but just it was a great vista from the top, so you climb up and picnic there and do a little sledding since we don't get a lot of snow there. Sort of interesting. Off-road vehicle use, they actually have a state park that's dedicated to off-road vehicles, hundreds of miles of trails over Tailings Flat. That's actually a tailings impoundment, so you can just see a little bit about the recreational use there. Actually, they had the Big River sand drags, so sand drag racing. That's not tailings there, but historically, it was tailings when they first started drag racing there, and you could see how a lot of dust would be kicked up. The Bonne Terre mine is actually pretty amazing. It's owned by the West End Dive Shop, or at least it was up until recently. It's multiple uses, including scuba diving, boating, tours. So you get pretty interesting place. You can see there's some scuba divers around all the historical equipment. St. Joe Lead Mining in Doe Run just left it in the mine. So now hundreds of feet deep, I think maybe at its deepest point, 600-700 feet deep. So a lot of divers like to train in it. We have state historic site dedicated to mining, so that they left some of the old processing facilities to look at. In the Southeast Lead District, by comparison, not as much recreational use, in part because it's more open prairie, more areas for off-road vehicle use, so it wasn't as interesting as Southeast Missouri, where it's mainly forests. You can see a little bit about the lead mining that really the railroads helped expand that lead zinc mining there, and so Joplin became the major economic driver for the city, and it became a typical mining camp with saloons, dance halls, gambling establishments, brothels. This little interesting factoid about a reign of terror by the miners as they blew off steam. And the House of Lords was a multi-level, fully functional, I guess, vice location to where they could blow off their steam. Eastern investors grew the town. And then, like I said, railroad systems and trolleys. And then Route 66 that you hear about sometimes really resulted in further growth, almost, doubling the population at the turn of the century. There's a picture of sort of the gritty mining town. There's just a little postcard, early 1900s, sort of touting, the importance of the area. Little interesting factoid here, the Mercy Hospital Network was developed to treat miners and their families from silicosis and tuberculosis. And so they started a hospital there that's now grown to almost 3 million patients in the tri-state area. And then just a little interesting thing, I think a lot of you know about the Joplin tornado in 2011. And so that was a focal point of the emergency response, even though it was damaged, that the casualties were brought there. So a really important legacy from the mining for that town. Carthage, which is a sister town, is sort of interesting because it was rebuilt in large part because of the lead zinc mining. Large quarry there that had gray marble, which is very rare in the United States, was developed there. And so all the wealthy mine owners and railroad owners lived in Carthage. They didn't want to be in the gritty, mine town, so they lived in Carthage. And then they built everything out of marble from that quarry, so you can see, very clean city in contrast to Joplin. This is a little bit leading into changes that are lead to the modern day. Lead mining in Missouri, really evolved through the industrial area up until the mid 20th century, and then started to decline, because of recycling, lead substitutes, the risks, human health risks from lead exposures, and increased environmental regulation that affects the economy, as all you mine owners know. The regulations for the mines really, drove the reduction of surface tailings deposits, and dealing with groundwater discharges, particularly in the Ozarks where it's high quality groundwater. You've seen like Branson, Missouri, and a lot of springs and major springs and seeps and things. So that reduced the number of competitor mines that could operate to address those. And Max talked a little bit about the smelters, so I won't get into that too much, but that was a major driver. Now, we just have secondary lead smelters for recycling now. And then I guess about regulation current day, CERCLA was a major driver, or Superfund, as many know, in driving cleanup. And in the Tri-State District, there's 4 major Superfund sites, and there's 7 in the Southeast Lead District. And so I'm not going to go through all these with the time constraints, but you can see it covers several counties. So, we tend to think about Anaconda and Butte being, these mega mine sites, and then obviously the other ones would be the Coeur d'Alene areas where it's, large expanses, tens or if not, dozens of miles across. Well, we had the similar situation in both of these districts. So you can see several counties that's probably 50 miles or more north to south. And then same thing in the Tri-State District, 3 states, 2 EPA regions. Again, 50-mile expanse, probably north, south, east, west as well on that. So both of these, districts have human health and ecological risks with that legacy lead mining. Remediation efforts are underway, as well as reclamation, and more is being planned. And hopefully, we're able to present in a future conference, more about remediation and reclamation and the status of it as it's ongoing. I guess I'll say I've been involved in a lot of that too. And so the joke in my family is my great-grandpa created the mess and now I'm cleaning it up. So with that, any questions?
I have to say that scuba diving in an abandoned underground mine is a new post-mine use for me. And I imagine that the release the legal department came up with for that is probably pretty extensive. You both used the term chat, which I've heard before. Could you define that, please?
Yeah, so chat's basically gang material, from processing. And again, the processing differs between the two districts. So the chat size differs. Southeast Mining District had a little more refinement, so finer particles, more like sand size. In the Tri-State District, just due to the mineralization, they didn't have to do as much crushing and processing of the gang material. So it's more coarse, more gravel, and even cobble size. But that's basically, it's the crushed gang material after initial processing.
I've got two questions. Is there any recoverable silver associated with the ore? And the second question is, what's the residual lead content in those tailings that you were sledding down?
So in terms of silver, as mentioned, especially for the Southeast Lead District, that's why the French were interested. They were actually going after silver, and a couple of the towns are named like Silver Mine. Actually very low concentrations of silver, so it wasn't economically developable, but it's present in more minor quantities. I didn't really mention this, but I actually had somebody I lived with in college, his dad worked in the assay lab at the Herky smelter, and so I saw the assay results, and like 0.1% at the most, but it's present. In terms of the lead content, I didn't do the research for this one to see how it varied in the chat dump, but it's significant enough that they remediated that chat dump. They actually, EPA, as part of the Superfund actions, did a containment approach because it was posing exposure risk. So it's not insignificant. Probably, I'm sure Doe Run looked at reprocessing and decided it wasn't worth reprocessing, but it's significant enough to pose human health risk. Any other questions? Yeah, Mike.
How many counties in Missouri are the highest points, the chat piles?
Oh, those chat dumps have the highest points? Yeah. Well, it's sort of interesting because they, especially in the South, in the Tri-State District, relatively flat area, so they would have been the highest points in those counties. In the Southeast Lead District, it's more mountainous with the Ozarks, but they were still significant. Didn't really show a picture of it, but there was actually a radio tower on one of them. So obviously it was one of the highest points around.
All right. Well, thanks, Gary and Max.